Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's webinar organized by Funds for NGOs. Today's topic is Artificial Intelligence for Research Development. First of all, I want to thank each one of you for taking out time from your busy schedules. This webinar will run for 60 minutes, which includes a 45 minutes of presentation followed by a 15 minutes of Q&A session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A option on your webinar screen to post your questions and we will respond to them during the Q&A session. Let's begin with webinar's objective. The first objective is to enable participants to understand how AI-powered tools can maximize data collection, processing, and analysis for research development. To provide information to participants on evaluation AI-driven methodologies that can enhance efficiency and accuracy in scientific exploration. To guide NGO leaders in identifying ethical considerations and responsible AI usage in research development. To create a platform for NGOs on the development of strategic AI-driven research methodologies to enable them to leverage AI for effective problem solving and innovation in their respective sectors. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available in the video section of Funds for NGOs premium website. And now allow me to introduce today's trainer, Dr. Christopher A. Johnson. Dr. Christopher is an award-winning journalist, editor, publisher, and business management consultant since the 1980s. He is also a former Commonwealth Nuffield Cambridge Press Fellow, Management Science Fellow, a certified Commonwealth Youth Worker, holder of an MBA in Marketing Management, and a doctorate in Business Management. He is renowned for his tutorials in bed writing, business planning, leadership, marketing, and organizational development cum capacity building. He is both founding director of Global Entrepreneurial Development Services Limited and chair of Community Education Academy of Leadership. He supports economic and social policy initiatives in Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and South Asia. Now, I kindly request Dr. Christopher to lead the session and share screen.
Thank you very much, madam, and welcome to this session, this 39th session on looking today at the artificial intelligence for research and development. It's one of those projects or one of those initiatives that is very important to NGOs. It's important to individuals and organizations as well, at home as well as abroad. Today we are going to be focusing on a number of what I would call categories regarding AI when it comes to research and development. We'll be looking at the introduction of AI and how it impacts on research and development. We'll be looking at key techniques of AI regarding research.
Sorry, doctor, I'm not able to see your screen.
You're not able to see the screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just I don't know what has happened here. Oh, share. Okay. Okay. Could you see the screen now? Okay.
Is it starting?
Okay. Okay. Could you see it now?
Yes, yes. No.
Sorry for that. Okay, so and we'll be looking also at how AI applies to different industries as well. Then we'll be looking at the future trends in AI and research and development. And then, of course, an AI strategy for research and development for NGOs. So let us begin by looking at introducing how AI can impact on research and development. And as you see on the screen there are so many different areas in which AI can impact. We are talking here about how you go about examining data, that is statistics, figures, numbers, and how these numbers can be processed using different types of data sets. So for example, if you have a project and you want to access information on labor employment statistics, issues to do with health and social care, for example, issues to do with gender-based affairs as well in your locality, your village, your district, or your region, or even the country in which you are operating in, you can use AI to access that information. Of course, you need to make sure that you know what is it you're commanding AI to do. And then, of course, you have predictive modeling. This has a lot to do with when you're trying to predict results or forecast results. So, for example, if there are common diseases or viruses in a particular area, or there are certain developments taking place in the country regarding education and training or business activities or even volunteering, you could actually use AI tools to forecast or to project what is going to happen. And it could also be used for monitoring and evaluation. And then, of course, when it comes to innovation, which is recreating, you can use AI tools to actually increase the volume of information you require. So again, if you're writing a bid, for example, or if you're looking for tenders, you can use AI to help you to access information on tenders in terms of their success rate, in terms of how they are actually marked or ranked by funders, and so forth. And then you have the question of customized services. This is where people within your organization and outside service users, clients, stakeholders may demand a particular set of services. They may need, for example, a training program on digital inclusion regarding health, informatics, or they may want a training program in terms of job-related activities. So those training programs would be seen as personalized or customized or linked towards the needs of individuals. And so again, you can use AI tools to actually help you to develop customized programs or models. So far, AI has not been very effective in terms of dealing with different languages. So people who don't have linguistic dexterity or they're not skilled in other languages besides their mother tongue as such will have problems with that. But AI tools can help you to translate. If you go on Google, for example, and you write something in Hindi, Swahili, Punjabi, Latin, Czech, Swiss, French, or Latin, or any one of those other languages, you can get some degree of translation. AI is not always effective, but remember, AI is a combination of web-based information and data. That's what it is. And it's a tool that you can use to access information from a variety of sources. In terms of decision making, yes, again, it's about evidence. Every project you do has to be informed by outcomes. Outcomes would be qualitative behaviors and attitudes of people, and outputs would be the amount of people who are involved in your projects or programs. So AI, in effect, provides you with support in making decisions when you have to intervene in different situations from time to time. There are, of course, other areas of AI. One of the things we didn't mention here is information and public relations, but that is something that we can discuss at another time. We've identified a few AI techniques that you can apply in research, and these are areas of research that are very relevant and appropriate to the work you do as NGOs. Most of you would be involved in humanitarian work. This is not just about conflicts that we have in the Middle East or in Europe or other parts of the world, but humanitarian mapping also involves looking at different segments of the population, trying to determine what the issues are and how you can find solutions, particularly in the climate change issues that we have at the moment, tropical conditions where you have rainfall, you have floods, you have volcanoes erupting as well, tornadoes, earthquakes. All of these could be used as the basis for an analysis using AI techniques. But again, it depends on the kind of tools you use. Public health, very important. And you notice there's an organization called PATH. They're very much involved in health services around the world, and they're involved in forecasting diseases and other conditions around the world. And then, of course, we're coming to animal species that are projected to be extinct, like different animals, for example, the elephants and other wildlife products, like wildlife material as well, the natural habitat that is affected by tropical rainforests, etc. All of these things can be used to detect what are the issues affecting different organizations and so forth. In terms of agricultural development, we have the drone system that is being used. For example, in parts of Africa and South Asia, scientists are using drone technology. This is where, you have so-called planes traveling from place to place, doing crop rotation, analyzing crop insecticides, pesticides, and a number of other diseases that affect crops as well as livestock. So digital technology can be used where that is concerned. We spoke earlier about humanitarian mapping. Again, in terms of the World Food Program, the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, they use technology also to look at different crisis responses in the world. So, for example, in Gaza at the moment, we have a crisis there, a famine. In Sudan, in other parts of the world as well, where people are caught up in war zone areas. So you can use AI to actually forecast the question of distribution and supply needs for individuals in terms of food and other amenities. And a while ago, we were talking about language inclusion or language inclusivity. This is where, again, AI can be used to help with the translation process in terms of cross-border issues. Some of you on the last occasion asked questions regarding different types of AI tools that can be used. There are several of them. The most popular of them, of course, would be ChatGPT and Google Gemini, and more recently Data Robot, which helps with predictive analysis. What I need to advise you guys about is that AI tools can only be effective as its users are effective or efficient. So if you're looking for information and data, you need to be very sure that you are commanding that AI tool. So for example, if you're using ChatGPT or even Google Gemini, you need to know exactly what is it you're looking for. So for example, you might say to ChatGPT, please give me or please provide me a table of statistics on labor markets in the Middle East, or labor markets in the Punjab, or labor markets in France, or unemployment figures in the United States, or issues to do with gender affairs in Scotland or Ireland, or alternatively looking at youth unemployment issues in the Caribbean and Latin American region. But unless you understand the issues you're referring to, AI would not be able to compose a table that is compelling with the necessary statistics. So a lot of AI issues we talk about, they have to be taught in practical terms. It cannot be taught necessarily on this platform. It has to be taught within what I would call a formal classroom setting so that people can understand not just how to use AI, but the language of AI, because the language of AI, for the most part, is English, so to speak. So again, you have to be able to understand words, structures, grammar, sentences construction, because sometimes AI gives you sentences that have no full stop or no comma, for example, because of the way in which it is commanded. So these are the little things that you need to consider. On the right-hand side there, we talked about accuracy, which is important, data privacy as well. We also need to look at the question of implementation costs, ethics, and so on. But these are some of the things that we will discuss as we go ahead with the presentation. But these are just some of the tools and the platforms that are available. And I would strongly suggest that you use ChatGPT because it's simple. It is free, at least so far. But again, you need to know exactly what is it you want the machine to do. Google Gemini is also very useful. It can help you with bid writing and grant proposals. But again, it's the information that you provide to these platforms that will equip you to understand not just how to use it, but in terms of the results. One of the interesting features of artificial intelligence, which was first mooted or was born in the 1950s, is the journey that AI has taken, the extent to which it has developed so much now that it has become integrated or integrative in different sectors, different industry sectors. In manufacturing, for example, it is used for logistics, in other words, collecting information, storing products and services. It is used for travel. Those of us who travel a lot, like myself, it is used to connect people's flights. It gives information on not just flights, but also weather patterns. It also tells you what is happening in other parts of the world when you get there or before you get there. And then you have automation, uh, where you use different types of vehicles, trucks, etc. Education, more and more students and pupils are being asked to use AI, but again, they need guidance on that because that can have an impact on intellectual property rights or plagiarism, where people are stealing information or taking information unconsciously and unwittingly without realizing what they're doing. In terms of healthcare, health services are using this. For example, there is something called telemedicine, and this is where you have several applications that you can download on your phone or your tablets or your computer, standalone computer, and you can use those applications to access information on a variety of conditions and diseases, and also looking at how you can actually improve your well-being. In terms of real estate, this is about property development, conveyance. Again, people use the technology to access information on property prices. They look at things like land reform. They look at industrial development, commercial development. For example, where houses will be built in social housing areas, etc., etc. And of course, information technology uses AI to enhance its capabilities and its capacities. Retail and e-commerce, this is where people shop. There's a site called Shopify. You have eBay, you have Amazon as well, and you have other different e-networks that are involved in retail purchasing, distribution, and supply. The media and entertainment is driven by AI at the moment, where people are accessing news and information at the speed of light. And of course, sometimes by the time you access the news and information, other things are happening. Banking and financial services, this is where decisions are made at all levels of the banking system in terms of deposits, withdrawals, sending you information on new trends in banking in terms of interest rates, savings, etc., on investment possibilities. You can also use AI also to find out where you can invest in stocks and shares, bitcoins, etc., and other forms of investment, even including land. Legal businesses, again, you can use this to access information on certain laws, rules, and regulations governing countries. For example, if you want to start a business in another part of the world, what are the requirements to start that business? What are the things you need to take into consideration? What is the level of the taxation system like unto? What is the financial system like unto? What are the distribution and supply chains and the intermediaries, the brokers that you need to consider? And then finally, the supply chain and logistics. These are linked to the distribution and a supply system anyway, because everything is driven by demand. So someone wants a product, that product becomes a demand issue, and industries are expected to provide them. So as NGOs, if you're operating in education, health, of course, you're operating in IT as well and travel, you need to find AI tools that you can apply so that you can be effective and efficient in the use of it. We spoke about commercial institutions. We spoke about banking and financial services in the previous slide. And this is a typical example of how different banking institutions in the UK, in North America, and parts of Europe are using AI tools to do a number of things. They're looking at things like illegal transactions being done. They're looking at the issue of fraud or the prospect of fraud. That is if people are involved in money laundering or they're stealing your money, for example. They also use it to customize customer services. So they look at things as to how clients can improve their savings, their investments. You have now virtual assistants in some banks telling you about how payments are made to corporations. And then you have also some banking institutions. In the case of the Royal Bank of Canada, they have platforms that provide you information on trading and how you manage your finances personally as well as enterprise-wise, etc. And then, of course, you have others like Westpac that would provide information on various types of lending services, whether you're lending to, whether you're borrowing to build a house or to buy a piece of land or to buy some other commodity. That information will be available to the bank at the bank in terms of the AI tools. In terms of productivity, this is very important. So some banks use data and data models to help employees to monitor their production and productivity. So for example, if you have an NGO of 5 or 6 people that are paid, or even if they're not paid, they're volunteering, you can use AI to actually measure their levels of production and productivity. So you can use things like timesheets, the number of times they attend training seminars, and you can use that information to put into a data set or a data model to actually measure their levels of production and productivity. And the same thing you can do within your organization. If you don't have a quality control handbook or you don't have formal quality assurance procedures, you can use AI actually to help you to do that. But again, you need to know exactly what is it you're looking for. In terms of workflow or work stream, so for example, if you have a project, you can also use AI, as the banks are doing, to help you to look at how you develop plans. So for example, if you have a 10-month project or a 2-year project, you can use AI to actually help you to develop a plan of action. Who's going to be doing what, when, why, where, how it's going to be evaluated, and what will be the extent of that evaluation and procedure that will be put in place. All of these things AI can do. Another aspect of AI, of course, is looking at market research. And so again, if you want to research your particular sector within the NGO, you need again to figure out what is it you're looking for. If you're looking for information on the number of funding tranches that are available, if you are looking at new developments in terms of finance, if you're looking at new developments in technology, again, you can use AI tools to help you to access that type of information. One of the important areas of banking institutions in terms of customer profiling is the fact that most banks would have information on customers, for example, their credit history, their borrowing requirements, their daily or weekly savings and withdrawals, and they can use all of those bits of information and data to put it into an AI tool or tools, and that AI tool or tools would give you an idea as to the kind of customers you're dealing with. So if a customer has a very low interest rate savings, in other words, they're not putting much money in the bank, the bank will use that information to actually try and publicize investment portfolios that customers can access, etc. So these are some of the features that banks tend to use when it comes to AI. In terms of generative AI, this is where you actually can generate information through ChatGPT for the most part. This is where you actually put information within ChatGPT and it tells you exactly what you need to access. Sometimes people use code. So for example, you might say, could you create a few bullet points on developing a strategy for finance? AI would suggest it would offer you bullet points, but those bullet points may not necessarily be accurate. So you would need to verify whether that information is accurate or not. And the only way you can do that is by tapping into the information you have within your NGO organization. In other words, you cannot provide ChatGPT with what is called arbitrary information. In other words, information that is not useful to what you're doing as an NGO. So these are just some of the examples that banks are involved in terms of using AI. And these are some of the, if you like, strategies that you can also employ as NGOs in order to make sure that your organization grows and it is sustainable. Like most technologies, there are issues around practices, ethical practices. Ethics are about behaviors, about people's attitudes. Some people bring prejudice, their prejudices, their bias, their discriminatory attitudes to all kinds of disciplines. Some people may take an offense if you introduce a new technology. They may find it difficult. Some people would use that technology to do things that are unethical, things that are wrong, illegal. And so in front of you, there's a slide which looks at the different attitudes and behaviors of AI developers, AI ethicists. AI ethicist would be the person who believes in doing things properly. And then you have the user. The user would be the person who actually uses AI, but you also have the affected user. The affected user would be your client or service users. So the AI developer here is asking the question, did the latest update further reduce the risk of gender bias? In other words, you know, the tools that you have, does it help your organization to recruit more women, more young girls, etc.? That's the question that the AI developer needs to look at. If those tools are not necessarily relevant to that particular cohort, well, then you need to develop a tool or have something that complements what you have so that you can look at that particular risk within the organization. And then the other question coming from the AI ethicist, this is the person who actually has to make sure that the systems are foolproof and are fit for purpose. Does the system address all relevant bias risks? All relevant bias risks simply means risks to the organization in terms of cost, risks in terms of staffing levels, risks in terms of competency or skill sets, risks in terms of other resources that you have, premises, buildings, etc. You need to make sure that if you have AI tools, that you have a full adequate power and electricity, very important. So if the power grid in that area is problematic, if you're subject to blackouts, outages, it could also have a risk, a negative risk on the organization because the quality of technology can be affected. And of course, the end user would ask the question, is it a good idea to follow the system's recommendation? In other words, if AI is telling you all the time that the information that you're giving is not correct or it is producing information that is incorrect, how do you change that? Well, sometimes you have to ask yourself whether or not you're providing the right questions or you're giving the right instructions to the AI tool in question. And then, of course, the affected user, is my job application being treated fairly? So you apply for a job, you apply for a position, and you expect that technology will solve the problem for you. But in this case, it is human beings who have to interact with technology that will solve the problem. So these are some of the behaviors that are associated with the use of technology by individuals. And we must remember that AI is not a standalone technology or technological tool. It's a resource that human beings use on a daily basis. So it doesn't exist on its own. It cannot operate in isolation of the human factor. And that is why it is so important for us to understand how AI has evolved. And the next slide will tell us exactly how that has happened. As I mentioned in a previous presentation, AI started in the 1950s, and the United States-born John McCarthy was the one who actually coined the phrase, the double phrase artificial intelligence, because he was looking at logic, he was looking at reasoning. logic is the art of reasoning, and he was coming up with several theories. How do we reason? How can man reason with machines? Or how could machines reason with man? Or a combination of man and machines working together. That was the idea behind his coinage of artificial intelligence in the mid-1950s. And from there on, it emerged or it evolved in the 1960s. People started to experiment with language processing. You had chatbot developing as well. People were looking at how data is computed and how that data can be analyzed. And then, of course, in the 1980s, you had people developing systems that can provide efficient decision making for businesses, particularly in the area of manufacturing. Those of us who were born in that era would remember the IBM machine, a massive computer machine that had several data sets within it. The software was so expensive at that particular time. And then, of course, by the 1990s, the new millennium era, you had people shifting to machine learning, developing algorithms which came from algebraic or arithmetic sciences, developing networks whereby you can communicate with people once you have what is called a common network. And then, of course, in 2000, you had the internet explosion, you had the dot-com. A lot of dot companies went there. You had Google, Amazon developing, eBay, and all of these other e-commerce platforms that were integrating with AI. In other words, they were actually accessing information through technological means to inform and guide their practices. And most of these companies now use technology to build, if not to revitalize their business models. And this is where NGOs can use the very simple tools of AI to integrate into their organizational development practices. But again, it's not just having knowledge of the technology, but it's having knowledge of your own organization and its practices if you are to become effective and efficient in the use of AI. Because AI is not a plaything, it's not a child's play. It is not, just tapping something into your phone. It's about understanding how these technologies are integral to the work you do as NGO practitioners. And then by the next decade, 2010 to the present time, we have what is called deep learning. This is where people begin to develop technology that can think like human beings. And as we know, the greatest computer is our brains, if not our minds. But people have been trying to develop technology that can think just like human beings. But that is an ongoing issue. For example, Elon Musk, the South African American, he has Tesla, and they've been using those vehicles to actually mimic forms of technology, etc. But these are just some of the different facets in the evolution of AI, and I'm sure that we will see many more in our lifetime. But again, it is important to understand the history and the context of AI in order to understand how we can utilize it proficiently within our organization. The future trends in AI and research development are quite remarkable, and you can see from Hostinga's research that between 2020 right up to the year 2032, AI would grow inexorably. We're talking here about 42% or probably more than that. And this is just one particular forecast showing that by the year 2032, that's the next 7 years, AI is expected to to have a 1.3 plus billion US dollars in terms of market share. That is the predictive market share for generative AI. This is AI that will be generated by you and I in terms of information and data. That is the market value. So if you put a market value on the amount of information and data that you access from AI, that will be the basis of this particular market share. So again, it is something to bear in mind. And of course, if you're going to use that information, you need to understand how you're going to develop a strategy, how you're going to use AI to develop a research and development strategy. And this is where it's at. And so there are some questions on the left-hand side that you need to think about before you actually develop a strategy for AI, before your organization is ready to implement it. And the first question is, who on your team, which person in the organization, has access to your AI solutions? Who's responsible? Is it your technology officer? Is it your secretary? Is it your treasurer? Because you need to have someone in your organization that has some degree of intelligence or at least some knowledge about how to use AI systems. Because AI systems is not just about being able to use a computer or a WhatsApp or a social media site. It's more than that. It's about understanding technology systems and how they're integrated. And then the second question, how will you keep donor and constituent information secure? In other words, the different grants, the different funders, how are you going to secure that information? What type of password encryption would you use or would you have? And then if you do that, who is responsible for that? Is it the administrator of the organization? Is it your project manager? You need to have at least someone responsible for keeping that information. And more importantly, how will you respond to security or ethical breaches? Very, very important. We spoke about that earlier. And then how will you ensure compliance with industry regulations? So you have the Data Protection Act, you have the Communications and Information Act. And then finally, you need insurance. You need insurance to protect you against risks, losses, etc. And then finally, you have here AI readiness, how you're going to go about creating compliance, what is it you're going to do in terms of organizational development, how you're going to implement a strategy. All of these are very important. What I want to emphasize, there are two things here. One is information. That information must be accurate, reliable, consistent. The data must also be accurate, and it must be of high quality too. Because if both are not synchronized, if they don't work hand in hand, your AI tools would not necessarily be effective. We are coming towards the end. These are just some of the global NGOs using AI for research development. So in North America, you have over 1,000 NGOs using AI. And one example is health education, poverty alleviation. In Europe, you have nearly 1,000 using AI tools for different reasons, mostly for climate action. Sub-Saharan Africa, again, you have hundreds of NGOs using AI for different things. In Asia and Pacific, you also have nearly 1,000 in Latin America, about 500, and in the Middle East and North Africa, again, you have some NGOs using AI. So if you look at this screen, you would notice here there is an overwhelming desire and need for AI to be used in research and development for non-governmental organizations. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Today we focused on a number of areas, looking at the introduction of AI. We looked at the techniques, the tools, the applications, the practices that researchers need to undertake from time to time, the trends in AI, and of course, a strategy to improve research and development. Thank you very much for listening. And at this time, I'd like to avail myself for any questions that you may wish to ask. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher, for your insightful presentation.
You're most welcome.
Participants, now we are taking the Q&A sessions. So the first question is, which application is that which can be put on computer and what does it do?
Yeah, I would suggest, for simplicity purposes, ChatGPT would be ideal. I use it very much for grant funding and research and development. I don't use it much for presentations because your presentations need to come from you. But I would suggest ChatGPT because it gives you a structure. If you want to get a structure, you have to create it, of course. And I think that would be the foundation to start with, to be honest. The other AI tools are useful, but they can be very complex. Again, it depends on which area you're working in. If you're working in education, again, ChatGPT. If you're working in agriculture, you will probably have to use other tools like Gemini and Chatbot and the others. But I would say ChatGPT is very useful for NGOs in terms of their practices at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. The next question is, can you explain how AI can support the early stages of research, design, or proposal writing?
Yes, again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. The concept of any project is the idea itself. Pardon the pun. How do you develop the idea of a project? What is it you're looking for? What is the name of the project? So what you can actually do is give the project a title, and you can go into ChatGPT and say, could you please compile a draft proposal based on this project title? It will give you something. It will give you a bit of information. For example, it might give you the aim of the project objectives, but you need to practically put in data. So you might say, could you please revise this proposal and include outcomes and outputs quantifiably and qualitatively? You have to use the language of technology. If you don't, you would get rubbish in, rubbish out. So again, it's important that technology cannot solve a problem. Let me say it very clearly. What it does, it facilitates solutions. It is a human being who solves the problem, not the technology. The technology is just there to assist. So please don't get it the other way around. We always think that technology can help us. It could only help us so far as the information we provide is accurate and relevant.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. The
Yes.
next question is, what ethical concerns should researchers be aware of when using AI tools in their work?
One is information. So for example, if you are doing a piece of research on gender inclusivity, meaning get, women and girls involved in economic and social development, you need to make sure that one, you have access to what is called primary data. Now, primary data, you would not find that on AI. Primary data is you have to go and do your own research. You have to use questionnaires. You have to do telephone surveys. You have to speak to people directly, face to face. All the technology, AI would just give you what is called secondary data. I use AI sometimes to get secondary data to, in other words, to corroborate or to verify whether that information I have is accurate. And quite often, primary research is more accurate than secondary data research because that information that is secondary has been published, let's say, a while ago. So again, use your human skill and combine it with technology, not the other way around, because it's not going to work. The other ethical issue you have to look at is not just accuracy, but relevance. So, for example, if you're looking at youth employment issues, does AI, does the information on AI, is it relevant to your area, to your district, to your village? So, for example, let's look at a village in my country, Guyana, a place called, let's say, Buxton, which is an English term for village. Now, AI doesn't have anything on Buxton whatsoever because Buxton is a village. It's not a city, it's not a town. And you'll find that in a number of countries too, where, because as I said again, AI is based on a number of web pages that have been designed by different people. So whatever information is available on the World Wide Web, that is what AI would actually um, focus on. So again, it's a human factor that has to play in that. And the other, probably more important aspect of ethical practices is where people take information literally and put it in their application. That is very, very unethical. It is also wrong because you're breaching copyright. For example, if you have a piece of information, let's say on mental disorders or emotional disorders by young people, try to see where you can have sources of information that are dated, let's say 2024, 2025, and use that information to actually support your evidence rather than just stealing or taking that information willy-nilly. So again, accuracy, making sure that the information is verifiable, and more importantly, attributing the source of that information to whatever project you have. I hope I've made myself somewhat clear.
Yes, doctor. The next question
Thank you.
is, can we use AI for crowdfunding and fundraising? And can you share any example of these tools? I think tools you have already told, ChatGPT, but can we use AI for crowdfunding and fundraising?
Yes, you can. You can use AI to find out where you can use AI to get sample sizes of people who invest in particular projects. So, for example, if you are doing crowdfunding for training people, let's say, in how to develop certain micro projects, micro agricultural projects, for example, using a small plot of land, which is called crop rotation, you can use AI tools to get that information, and that information can then be put on your crowdfunding site. Because what you're doing is saying, look, we might not be agricultural producers, but we have evidence to support that these youngsters are interested in doing something for themselves. So you can use AI in that sense to do research where that is concerned.
Thank you, doctor, for your input. The next question is there any specific universal rule in the funder cycle that prohibits the use of AI in proposal writing at the moment? Are nonprofits allowed to use it or not?
Yes, but you are allowed to use it to a point, but what people tend to do, again, this is about language, this is about clarity, this is about communication. Again, if you are using AI, you need to be a very good communicator, not just in writing, but in logic. In other words, if you identify some very important bits of information on AI, let's say ChatGPT or Gemini, or even the Google's site itself, the Google search engine. If you identify that information, make sure that that information has a source. So what you don't do is just cut and paste and leave it there, because funders, and I've sat on funding panels, I would know very quickly once I look at that information, I will say, well, that information didn't come from the NGO. It came from a source that is unidentified. And so what the funder will probably do, the funder will determine whether or not that information, not that it's not accurate, but whether it is verifiable proof coming from that organization. So, for example, if you come across some information which says, you know, the research shows this, the research shows that, you now have to use the pronoun we believe, or we discovered, or we researched this information and we found XYZ. So always use a pronoun we, I, or us when you're going to rewrite something coming from AI. Don't just use AI, the sentences as they are. And as I said, this is far more complicated than it is. So again, study what AI does and also try to understand how it fits into your scheme of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. The next question is, what basic skills or knowledge should a researcher develop to begin using AI effectively?
The first skill is information, right? Information. You need to understand what information does, and that is something we'll probably look at some other point, because information skills are very, very important. It's not just taking information raw as it is and putting it there on a page. You have to understand where that information came from, the source of it. Is that information authoritative? In other words, is it reliable? Can it be used? Is it respected? Could it stand up to scrutiny? And where did it come from? Did it come from an institution? Did it come from an expert? How renowned is that expert? Is that expert respected? The second skill, of course, is research. Research is about investigation. So you need to develop investigative skills. And research simply means searching again and again until you get the information. And then the other thing about that is, the other skill that you need to have is presentation skills. How do you present information? Do you present information in bullet point form? Do you present information in sentence form, paragraphing, tabulated form, graphs, charts? Those are skills that you need to develop if you don't have them. And then finally, technological skills. How do you adapt all of those skills we're talking about, information, presentation, into a technological format? Because technology is all about science and engineering, but you need to have what is called generic types of information, and that information has to come from you. So again, it's about combining the human with the machine learning skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. Due to participants, due to time limitations, we cannot cover all the questions posted here. As now we have reached the end of the webinar, I want to thank each one of you for your active participation. Please take a moment to fill out the feedback form for today's session. Your input is crucial in helping us to improve. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact us at support@fundsforNGOs.org. The feedback form will appear on your screen in a moment. Once again, thank you, Dr. Christopher. And to all the participants, we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.